Shane Hendren from the Rio Grande Tech Team. And today I have a special Tech Team guest member, Paulene. But before we get to Paulene, let me remind you, until the end of March, Bonnie 10 will get you 10% off anything Bonnie Doon from Rio Grande. Once again, that's Bonnie 10. So start gathering together, get your questions, your jewelry questions together, and we will answer them as best we can. So Pauline, welcome to Tech Team Live.
Hello. It's nice to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Pauline. You're one of the newest members to the Rio Grande Tech Team.
Yes. Yeah. I've been on the team for like 2 years now, right? And then I've only been in the industry for about 7 years now. So I'm pretty green to the industry.
Yeah.
And then I'm also pretty green to the tech team, but I think I fit in pretty well. You guys haven't kicked me out yet.
So tell us about your background. How did you get into jewelry? What is your specialty?
So with what I do, I'm actually specializing more in the micro TIG welders now, but my dad was a steel fabricator, so I kind of grew up fabricating in steel and then got to college, didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, and C&M, the local community college, was starting their jewelry program. And so I was like, meh, I mean, I know how to work around in a shop, and so I kind of did that and hit the ground running. And in the podcast, Mark Nelson and I got to talk. He was actually one of my instructors at the time at C&M. And so he and I were kind of working together, and then I came here and started working with him, and so he was my introduction to Rio. But other than that, I've just been kind of floating the wave until I got here.
Yeah, Mark's great. I'm looking forward to getting him on a Tech Team Live one of
That
these
would be
days
fun.
soon, because Mark is also a former Tech Team member,
Right.
and he's been teaching at CNM now for
A while.
a long time.
And then he also just works with a lot of schools too. So our last podcast, I believe it was when we talked with Stacy and Brian, and they are instructors in Montana, and so he knows all of these different people all over the country and all over the world, and he has a lot of really interesting stories.
So I always get it wrong. Is it Rio for Schools?
It's Rio
Or
for Schools.
Rio for Schools.
Yeah.
That's what it's called now. So anybody who is in the education segment of the jewelry
Yes.
industry, they can contact Rio Grande. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're an instructor, even if you do home courses, things like that, you can contact Mark Nelson at Rio for Schools here at Rio Grande.
Right.
He'll set up an account, which means the instructor gets a discount,
Right.
but then their students also get a discount. But the way Mark explained it to me, if I understand it correctly, is they get a limited, like 6 month access as a Rio Pro.
Right,
So they get
exactly.
the Rio Pro discounts, and they also have the ability to buy the things that Rio Pro customers get.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
So it's not just like a student discount, it is also a Rio Pro discount. So they get access to all materials, all findings, all gemstones. Whereas, like, as a student, when you're starting out, you probably don't have the normal spend that a Rio Pro would have to get there. But as an instructor, you can give a code to students to give them that access.
So when you were starting out, did they have those kinds of programs available to you?
No, I mean, that was beginning, I don't know. I was in school in 2017, and so I don't think we had come up with the Rio for Schools program yet.
don't
I
know.
think that's a fairly new thing that we've started doing. New in like a couple of years, not necessarily as long as I was in school for. But I mean, Mark being an instructor, he was able to bring us like tools that would have gone to somewhere else, but he was able to give us like hammerhand pieces and a lot of tools, so we were able to get some access to stuff too.
So when you did start out at CNM, what did you start out doing? What were some of your first projects? What got you interested in jewelry?
Well, the thing that we did consistently was we were doing soldering samples, so it would be like using easy, medium, hard, and extra easy solder to just kind of like solder pieces together, right? And I did one, and it was like probably the best solder I've ever did that one first time. I've never soldered that well ever again. But I did that, and I was like, oh, this actually isn't that hard, because I grew up around a huge cutting torch. Using a small silversmith is so different and not really the same at all. So I started kind of doing that, and then when we got into stone setting, that was really more of what I liked. I liked the ability of using tools to make art, because I had the knowledge of tools, and I'm not a great artist. I can't draw a stick figure,
Yeah.
but being able to do something with a medium I was already interested in and already had like familiarity with was what made that so much easier.
Interesting. So in the classes at C&M, how are those structured? Like, how did they get you from point A to point B so that because they were introductory jewelry
Right.
classes, how did you get going and then develop the aptitude where now you're on the tech team?
So what the program at CNM is it's small metal and bench jewelry. So it is more art centered. It's more of like sculptural. It's more of you're using jewelry techniques, but not necessarily with jewelry in mind. So there was a lot of like riveting projects. There was a lot of texturing projects to kind of start out with, and then fold forming was another one. And then it would progressively get more difficult of like soldering a ring band, soldering a bezel cup, soldering the cup to the ring band, and then got progressively more complicated until we finished with, I think it was channel setting and casting. We made our own molds, we made our own waxes, and
Oh,
things like
cool.
that. So it started out pretty abstract and then got more into real world for jewelry applications. So it went from just kind of playing to applying those techniques that you learn from playing into actually using them. And I think I had to build like something with a hinge, and I did a couple of different things, tube settings, yeah, lots of different stuff. The program is probably much different now. They have a lot more tools and space now. I don't know if you've been to the CNM area, but they've got a huge studio now.
I have not. I have not been to the C&M area. I teach at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, so they have a full-blown jewelry program there as
Yeah.
well. But out of that, I have a question from Emily. Emily wants to know, what torch do you prefer?
It depends on what I'm doing. I actually have a couple of torch setups because as jewelers, we're
Hmm.
tool junkies. I usually use just a silversmith torch, so it's just acetylene and universal air. I have a little smith, so it's propane and oxygen, but I use that specifically for like if I'm doing small gold. I have it set up somewhere else other than my acetylene.
Hmm.
I've used the Orca torch. Orca torch is really great. It's a small system you could hook up to a propane tank. And for people who are starting out, I would suggest that over pretty much anything else other than a silversmith because it's easy. You can buy the little like 5 pound propane tanks and you can get them from a hardware store and just use an Orca torch. And it works really well. I was able to do a lot with it before I moved up into bigger torches. So I think it just depends on what you're doing.
Do we still sell the Orchid torch?
We do. Yeah, it came back.
Oh, okay.
It's on the website now. I think it's
Right.
probably
Yeah,
like about $200.
I knew we had some availability issues. But yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm a silversmith torch fan. I That's what I recommend to people when they're first getting started
Right.
because I had an old jeweler that when he started out, they used the old blow torches, and then one day, the first person I had on this was Phil Scott,
Right.
and you should ask Phil Scott about guys that solder with gasoline. They blow through a hose, and there's gasoline, and that's what they use as a torch. And you don't want to suck. You always got to
Right. Of
blow.
course not.
But it's crazy. He tells the craziest stories. Some of the things he's seen and done. But yeah, it's pretty wild. We did have some questions that came in previously, and we were going to get to those. One of them was somebody was asking about the preferred adhesive for gluing broken stones back together. This is
Yeah,
kind of a trick question
it is.
because in most instances, I don't recommend gluing stones.
Right. You could, in theory, like if you had like a big piece of agate and it broke into a couple of pieces, what I've seen most is people will just take those pieces and make them into smaller stones.
Right.
We do have something called Opticon, which is like a fracture sealer. I
Hmm.
think a lot more people who work in turquoise typically use that. I don't know how it fares well with agate, but you would want if you were to glue stones together, glue it back together, you would want to use something that is intended for like lapidary. So you don't
Right.
want to use just any old like epoxy or super glue.
So epoxy 330 is typically the epoxy that I recommend most of the time.
Yeah, and I think that
It's
would be fine. I use that in inlay, so it should be okay. But Opticon, I know for sure, is like a fracture sealer.
Oh, we opened a Pandora's box here. And I'm probably going to kill this name, so I apologize in advance. It I have a question here from Radrowska Vegad, and they want to know they recently learned about the alcohol mouth blow torch, and they want to know how useful is it because I found out that they only work for very small parts.
I've never heard of that torch. I've seen glass blowers where they have like the tube in their mouth and they
Right.
use like a torch, but I've never dived into that because I mean, I already work with big torches and a big tank full of compressed gas. That's as
I'm
dangerous as I
gonna
want to
say it
get.
first, not it. You get to research that one.
Okay, I'll look
So
into that one.
we're gonna get back to you on that because I know nothing about an alcohol mouth blow torch.
Yeah,
So
we'll
Pauline
definitely
is gonna
answer
look
that one.
into that, and we'll get back to you because yeah, that's a new one to me.
That's a new one.
I mean, I think I know what you're talking about, but I'm not positive. You see crazy things on the internet,
Right.
which blows my mind.
Right.
So you said in the intro that you've become a specialist in micro TIG welding or pulse arc welding. There's
Right.
all these different names for it.
Right.
And you're also our, how would I put this? You are our SME on permanent jewelry.
Right. Yeah, so
And
that's
because of
become my
that,
thing.
you have developed this skill set and explain to us exactly what permanent jewelry is. Give us a little insight.
So for those that haven't heard about permanent jewelry yet, because it is very popping right now as far as like a trending thing, and I don't think that the bubble has necessarily popped yet, it is a chain that is linked to itself using a microtic welder, so a pulse arc welder. So you're typically welding the chain back together. You're not using an open flame, you're using a closed current. And so what you're doing is you're taking something that is in a grander scale, people think of TIG welders, they think of it as like these large things with a
Right,
huge
right.
mask and versus this is a small pulse arc, so you're typically clipped in and you're touching a tungsten electrode and that's creating a small arc.
But it's still an arc, so you still need eye
You
protection.
do still need eye protection, and most microtig welders, if you get them from reputable sources, will have some sort of advanced darkening lens or auto darkening lens to protect your eyes from any damage that might come from that. So it's either in the form of a screen or it's actually built into a microscope, so that way your eyes are protected anytime there's an arc.
So what are the chances of a customer getting a burn, for example?
I'd say very minimal.
Yeah.
If you're practicing, which I would suggest always practicing when you're working with a micro-TIG welder, there's very minimal chance that somebody could get burned with a TIG welder. The risk is always there, but since it's not actually producing heat from the welder, it's heating up the metal, there's very minimal chance. I typically suggest people, if they're welding on somebody, to have some sort of pad underneath the chain
Right.
to make sure that that skin is protected if something pops or if it gets hot. But where the weld is, that's typically where the heat will happen because it's closed.
Yes, I use the pulse arc welders for fabrication,
I do too.
retipping, things like that. So I know there's a lot of flexibility in
Right.
them, but I know a lot of our customers, actually the permanent jewelry thing has just been flying out the door.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me how many people are buying those welders for permanent jewelry.
And one of the things I actually experienced just in general from people who are buying these welders, they are big pieces of equipment. You are spending a lot with them. Even the smaller ones, you're spending at least $1,000. And what I'm finding now is that people who started out in permanent jewelry, they're kind of going backwards. They started out in production and are now
Right.
going into fabrication. And so you don't need anything particularly fancy to be able to fabricate with one of those welders. I've used the Zap welder to fabricate with.
Well, I mean, that is not an uncommon thing. I mean, when
Right.
I started out in jewelry, I did very rudimentary types of things like tufa casting and stamping
Sand casting.
and things like that. It was super simple stuff. But in retrospect, when I look back, that was probably some of the most profitable stuff.
Right.
Because I had the least amount of overhead
Right.
and the least amount of tools
Right.
and was making a very good return on my time and my investment.
Right.
So a lot of people that are out there watching, I want to encourage you. You know, it doesn't hurt to start small.
Yes.
Simple is easy, and it really is the way to go when you're getting started.
Right.
So when you were getting started, like on the tech team, why did you choose the tech team? Because
Well,
you worked. Tell us first. You worked in other aspects of the business here at Rio Grande. What did you do before you got to the tech team?
yeah, so I started out actually in the call center. So you probably, if somebody recognizes my voice, probably remembers me when I was in sales. In just life in general, I've been in retail for a really long time, but when I came to Rio, I realized how much I really did love jewelry and how much I loved talking about jewelry to people. So I was already acting kind of as a stand-in resource for my team as far as like a somebody who might know the answer versus when tech was unavailable, right? And so it was just kind of like a gradual improvement into like the next step. So I went from the call center into the advanced product placement training, which is APPT. And so I was taking that and I was getting more. And then I was coming downstairs and bugging you guys to show me what you were learning or what you were doing. And so I harassed all of you pretty frequently when I was first starting out. And then that was just kind of like, oh, I really do like talking more about jewelry than anything else. And so it was just kind of right time, right opportunity. When I came back to Rio, I was like, I want to be on the tech team. And I told Betsy, I was like, I want to be on the tech team. I want to be on the tech team. And she was like, okay, I'll get you there. Just give me some time. And so it was like, I already knew what I wanted. I just had to wait to get here, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Betsy because March is Women's Month,
And she was just
and
posted.
every week we're featuring a different woman that works here at Rio. And if anybody wants to know who Betsy is, you can actually go on to our Instagram or our Facebook, and we have these little short biographical sketches and
Right.
photographs of these people. And one of them is Betsy.
Yes.
Betsy, how would you describe Betsy's position?
Betsy is she's a director now, and so she manages most of the sales teams.
Right.
But as a person, she was like a really wonderful mentor for me, as far as like somebody I could look to and ask questions and to kind of talk about the hard stuff with for getting into like furthering my career here.
Right.
She gave me a lot of guidance and was always very supportive, but she's a sales director, I believe, is what her role is now.
And so when you came onto the tech team, what was the process that you had to go through to get onto the tech team?
Well, I had to be, our kind of basis was like in sales and having like experience with dealing with our website, our systems, and kind of the basics of the company, right? I didn't have as much jewelry experience, but I had a lot of sales experience. I was pretty new coming into Rio as far as my jewelry kind of journey. So I had the sales experience, and that kind of transferred into my basic jewelry knowledge was fully rounded out. I don't think it's actually fully rounded out now. There's so much more to learn at all times, but getting into APBT and taking those classes during the day and getting more information from that. And then there was a position that was open, and so I went for it. And it's funny because Mark Nelson immediately, as soon as it was posted, he was like, "Are you going to go for it?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course. I don't know if I'll get it, but I'm going to go for it." And that's kind of how I got here. It was more of bringing my sales experience and combining that with more jewelry experience from learning here.
I see. Yeah, and I'm totally different, but because they told me I would never sell anything being on the tech
Right.
team. You're right. We don't want you to have sales experience. We
Right.
just want you to have jewelry
I was the
experience.
complete opposite. I had a lot of sales experience.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up Mark again, though, because Mark Nelson, along with Mary Elena Baca,
Right.
they used to run our education department
Right.
because what a lot of people don't know at Rio Grande is we educate internally. And so Mark and Mary Elena had this extensive training program that they had.
Yes.
We used to offer classes and everything here. It was crazy because one of our tech team members who will be on soon, Scott Bradford, he actually took his very first jewelry class here at Rio Grande in one of those classes.
Yeah.
And now he's on the tech team. It's crazy.
Right.
But it's cool because for a while there, they phased out the educational thing. And now you're actually one of the main trainers.
Right,
Because the
internally.
training has been revived for our call center and things like that
Right.
because it's hard for people to sell things if they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
So we do a lot of internal training to help people understand what it is that they're telling about or talking about. And you're one of the main trainers now. So tell us a little bit about that training program you work on.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up because I would say I've learned more being at Rio than I have going through school. And I still take classes, but even just being around the people that I'm around, I learn more than I could ever. This is like the library of information. But with the programs, we kind of go through the basics of products and processes. So we start people out with sawing, get them through kind of like sawing and filing, and then we move into like sanding and riveting so they have an idea of kind of
Right.
manipulating metal.
Because you're teaching people that have zero
Yes.
jewelry background.
Right.
And the vast
Or
majority
some,
of them,
a little bit.
but the majority of them have zero jewelry
Right.
background, and they're here to work a call center job.
Right.
But you're teaching them the fundamentals of
Right.
jewelry, related to the products we're selling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's more in a sense of like helping them feel confident with the product that we sell, because even at one point when I had first started, I didn't know anything about the product that we sold. I knew, the stuff that I'd used in school and more about tools, but as far as like, how does a lobster class work? Or we
Right.
even do like a beach stringing thing, being on tech, you have to know a little bit about everything
Right.
or a lot about everything. And so even just giving them the confidence of, oh, I remember using that in class. Those are those type of pliers. Or, oh, I remember them talking about these cutters can't be used with steel. Now I can tell you what cutters can be used for
Right.
steel. So like really kind of basic information. And we do encourage people to further learn and keep going in the training programs, but we give them tools to rely on themselves so that way they don't feel lost, because customers asking you 100 questions, sometimes you don't know the answer, so hopefully we can get them at least 50% of that answer, so that way they
Yeah,
don't have to feel panicked.
I know a lot of times call center agents will call me panicked because,
Yeah.
the jewelry industry has so many different, the verbiage, the
Right.
language,
Facets of
there's so many
things.
different
No pun
words for
intended.
one thing.
Right.
It's regional, it's depending on the country of origin.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different things. That's been perhaps the greatest challenge for me.
Right.
The technical part of jewelry is easy.
Right.
I didn't know there was 47 different words for this
Bezel.
one tool.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or
And
mountings, heads, prong settings, there is like a huge variance in how somebody would call something. And then if, you're coming to me and so you've learned from different people, I've learned from different people, how you were taught was completely different
Right.
from how I was taught. And so it's like having to know enough about something to be able to talk to that.
we've got a quick question here.
Mm-hmm.
Allie says, "Hi, are there other uses for the pulse arc welder other than permanent jewelry?"
Yeah, there's a lot of other uses. So you and I were kind of talking about fabricating with them. You can do a lot of repairs with them. You can use them for things that you couldn't use with a torch with. So if you needed to repair something that had a stone set into it and you didn't want to take that stone out, you could fundamentally do a repair without
Right.
having to do that. You could do ring sizing. I use it the most for like fabricating, especially if I need to do delicate work and I can't feasibly use a torch for something like that, because a pulse arc welder is fusing metal back to itself, so it is a very strong bond.
One of the things that I use it for fabrication a lot, and I recommend it to a lot of people that do large fabrication.
Right.
One of the things I do with it is I will tack things into place before I solder it,
Yes.
because, especially when you're working with sterling silver and, handy flux, as soon as it gets to that liquid state, things want to start moving on you. So when you tack weld it into place, nothing's going to move. It's going
Right.
to stay right where you want it, and you don't have to worry about that.
Exactly.
And it eliminates that 1,000 clamps that you end up putting on there.
Well, and it's like it's a time saver, and so it helps kind of like take away some of the time that you would spend, and especially if you're like a single studio and your time is money, having something like that to help you take away a few hours of total time helps you produce faster and helps you save more money or produce better.
Well, we're closing in on the end of our half hour, so I got a couple
That
of
was
key
fast.
questions I want to ask you. One of them is, what's your favorite tool on your bench? Better than that, because I've asked this a couple of different ways. If you're recommending to somebody's getting into the jewelry business,
Right.
what's your top 3, top 5, whatever? What do you say? This is what you absolutely need
To be successful,
not to be successful, but to get going.
to get started. A Fordham, an SR motor. That's
Okay.
probably the beginning.
And tell us a little more. What is that exactly?
So it is a rotary tool. It
Okay.
is a rotary tool that has a handpiece to hold different bits on the end of a shaft. And so
Okay.
the motor spins, and then you have a shaft that is actually more functional than if
Flex
you were
shaft.
using, it's a flex shaft. So instead of using like a drill bit, you're
Okay.
using something that has more
It'll hold
movability.
burrs and sanders
From
and different
0
things.
closed all the way up to 3 millimeters.
Okay.
So you can put any bit into that. And especially if you
That's the
are
H30 handpiece you're talking about. Okay.
just basic SR motor with an H30 handpiece, because that's the one that I've had for years and I've made it work.
That's a good call. I like
Right.
that. What
And
else?
so,
What else do you have?
And so then to use with that, I would say getting like a GRS, either a Benchmate, you could get a QCX, but a QC Basic is probably
and
the
what is
best to
that?
start.
What is that Benchmate or QCX?
It's a vise. So
Okay.
you mount mount it onto a dovetail that goes onto a bench, and that vise actually is rotatable. So if you're doing stone setting, it makes it so much easier. Or if you need to do detail work on a piece, or need something to hold something else and be able to move like you would.
So it's a holder. It holds things
It's a
that
vise.
you're working on.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So QC, the Benchmate, a Fordham, and then I would say something like a diamond wheel. And the reason why I say diamond wheels is because I take a lot of bits that are, broken, or I take old tool steel and I turn them into punches or other things that I need. I use my tools to make more tools.
Right.
And so having something that can sharpen and polish steel or shape steel is going to help you, because sometimes there is a tool out there, but it's $1,000, or the tool doesn't exist and you need it right there. Sometimes I have, I need like a stone setting punch for a big stone and I don't have that tool. I go make my tool. I think those are things that are really essential, is being able to learn how to make your own tools.
We got a great big thank you from Kayla Jackson. She said she enjoyed the host and the interview session. Thank you for having the live.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I think that's something that's important that a lot of people that have been in the jewelry business even for a while don't realize. And I learned this early on. A lot of times you just have to make the tools yourself,
Yes.
whatever it is. Wilson Capron, anybody who is interested in bits and spurs, my buddy Wilson Capron is a world-class bit and spur maker. But he showed a video a couple weeks ago where he made this little scraper.
Okay.
And so he wasn't engraving the steel.
Right.
He was scraping the steel away to shape it.
Interesting.
And it was the
Okay.
coolest thing.
Right.
Because it was like this little micro hoe, and he's using it to
just
scrape
metal.
and pull he's shaping the steel with this little tool that he made. You're not going to find this tool anywhere.
No.
You got to make it.
Right.
But-
Interesting.
But that's the advantages of Tech Team Tuesday.
Right.
You can call in. You can ask any of your technical questions, and we'll answer them for you. But before we go, my last question for you before we end our show today is, if you could go back in time to your 12-year-old self, what piece of advice would you give yourself? Doesn't have to be jewelry.
I'd probably tell her it all works out.
Yeah?
Yeah, everything worked out, and that whatever I was doing at 12 years old, it will work out in the end, and you'll do what you find out that you've always wanted to do. I don't know that I would just say keep doing it. There's nothing to change. Do
you ever really know what you want to do?
No, but I know what I want to eat for lunch, but that's about it.
That's good. I don't even know what I want to eat for lunch. But anyhow, as we come to a close, I want to remind everybody until the end of March, Bonnie 10 will get you 10% off of anything Bonnie Doon at Rio Grande. And I want to thank you, Pauline, for a wonderful
Thanks for
Tech
having
Team
me.
Tuesday, and I look forward to our next one. I want to get somebody. We'll see who's going to be here next Tuesday.
We'll have to convince him nicely.
So remember, get your questions in. If you see this, even though we're done being live and you see it on Facebook or YouTube, you can still type in your questions, and we will answer them in the next one, or we'll answer them online. But we'll get them answered. So ask your questions. Have a great day.